topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask Good Questions podcast, broadcasting live every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY Radio at W4CY.com. This week and every week, we will reach for a higher purpose in money and life, as well as a focus on health and wellness. Now, let's join your host, Bonita Bell Anderson, as together we start with Asking Good Questions.
Hey, hello, this is Bonita Bell Anderson, and this is the Ask Good Questions podcast. And boy, are we going to ask some good questions today. I want to invite my guest, Dr. Eldred Taylor, to the proverbial podcast stage.
Hello. How are you doing?
Hello. We are going to talk about weight gain, brain fog, bad advice, and hormones. So before we get into all this stuff, I would love to have you just say a little bit about you and tell us a little bit about your background and who you are.
Okay. All right. Well, I am Dr. Eldred Taylor. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee by a mother and a father, and my father was a Baptist minister. So I grew up in a Christian background. Now, I went to Vanderbilt University. I studied in molecular biology, and then I went to Emory to medical school. So I'm half spiritual, I'm half science. And so I've started to marry those two. But anyway, I trained in OBGYN and practiced OBGYN like everybody else for about 7 years. Until my wife started.
I have a labor delivery nurse daughter. I have a daughter. One of my daughters is a labor delivery nurse.
Yeah. So, hey, I did that. I got up in the middle of the night delivering babies. I did all of that stuff. But what changed my life is that my wife started having hormone issues. And I did what I was taught in school. You know, you give birth control pills. You just tell them to, hey, suck it up, whatever. Just give them birth control pills. And I saw that didn't work. And I was wondering why it didn't work. And I had a patient that came in that said, Dr. Taylor, do you know anything about natural hormones? And I'm like, nah, I don't know anything about that. And if I don't know anything about it, it must not be that important. Right. But she happened to give me a cassette tape. That's how long ago it was. It was about 25, 30 years ago, gave me a cassette tape. And I was really too proud to listen to it. But my wife listened to it and said, I think this guy's talking about me. The next day I listened to it, and from then on, my life changed. He taught me what I didn't learn in medical school is how actually hormones work in a woman. Now, you say that's crazy. Could you go to a residency at Emory and not learn how hormones work? Well, it's because we are focused on pharmacology and not physiology. Right. So they told me how to give birth control pills. They told me how to cut out uteruses. They taught me how to give Permin and Provera. But no one actually clinically looked at how do you measure and balance hormones. And so I became very interested in that. And I found out that the way you measure hormones is through saliva. And I'll talk about that in one of those 5 mistakes. And the funny thing is, Bonita, is that I went through a 4-year residency, and we never, ever drew blood levels to look at hormones. We just didn't. And the reason why is that the textbook says, and I have a lecture about this, that looking at hormones in the serum gives you little to no clinical information. So it really doesn't tell you anything. And I can talk about that a little bit later when I talk about those mistakes. But understanding, measuring, and balancing hormones through saliva changed the course of my life, changed the course of my career. It caused us to write these 2 books, Are Your Hormones Making You Sick? And The Stress Connection. And now I was telling you earlier that I went around the country promoting these books and talking to patients and lay people, patients and physicians. And that wore me out after a while. And so now I'm trying to do this a different way through social media, through podcasts. And I appreciate the invitation because this is another opportunity for me not to have to get on a plane and go on a conference and go talk to people.
Because where are you?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. And I am all the way over on Oahu because I'm serving a mission here with my husband. But I'm also continuing to do my stuff because you can, right?
Exactly. My goal was to expand my information outside of my office in Atlanta. I would have patients come in and say, "Oh, my sister needs to hear this." And I'm like, okay, let me figure out a way where I can reach people and I can still sit in my house or I can be wherever and I can still kind of carry out my purpose is to try and spread this information.
So you basically covered what you were taught in medical school or what you were not taught about measuring women's. So let me just go on to then. Women are told that weight gain after 40 is normal. That's exactly what I was told. It is like, oh, you're just getting older. Nothing you can do about it. So why is that narrative misleading? Okay.
So let's start from the beginning. I always like to start with the basics. All right.
There you go.
So the basics are women. The lifespan of a woman is greatly influenced by their menstrual cycle. Okay. The menstrual cycle, puberty is when your menstrual cycle is trying to regulate itself. It's trying to get in a rhythm of estrogen and progesterone. And so whenever you're transitioning into one phase of life, there's always turbulence. So here's what happens. Estrogen comes around every month to regrow tissue so that you can prepare for a pregnancy. All right. Then you have to ovulate. And when you ovulate, you make an egg. And then there's this other little cyst called a corpus luteum. That's not important, but it makes progesterone. So estrogen causes growth and progesterone causes development. It helps that tissue to develop normally. And 14 days after ovulation, you should either be pregnant or you should have a period. 14 days after ovulation. Okay. So now during your reproductive years, estrogen and progesterone have to be in balance. Estrogen causes growth, progesterone causes development. Now, progesterone also is an antidepressant, anti-anxiety hormone. So if you don't have enough of that 2 weeks before your period, you can become anxious and depressed. And also, progesterone helps you to burn fat for energy, and estrogen makes you store fat. So the reason why you gain a little weight, you can gain a little weight in the second half of your cycle is that if there's more estrogen there than progesterone, you're not burning off that fat as quickly as it being stored. Now, after 40, here's what happens. You begin to ovulate irregularly. Your eggs that you have at 40 and beyond are the same eggs you had when you were born. So 40-year-old eggs don't ovulate as well as 20-year-old eggs. What happens is you make estrogen and you may or may not ovulate. And even if you don't ovulate, you don't make enough progesterone. That egg doesn't make as much. So at perimenopause, you ovulate less, but you're trying to ovulate. So you're making more cysts. So you're making more estrogen that causes you to store fat. You're making less progesterone that's causing you to burn fat. At menopause, you stop ovulating altogether. But God made it where you still can make estrogen. And he gives women extra fat tissue because in fat tissue, you can convert androstenedione and testosterone to estrogen. So even though you're postmenopausal, even if you've had a hysterectomy and they've removed your ovaries, women still can make fat tissue, and that fat tissue can still make estrogen. And then estrogen makes you make more fat tissue. So now you're in this vicious cycle. And I see women all the time who say, hey, look, I eat like a bird and I do CrossFit 9 days a week and I don't lose any weight.
Yeah.
You're in this vicious cycle.
That's me.
Yep. And this number one mistake that women make is they think that the solution is more estrogen. They don't realize that their problem is that they're already making estrogen. And the reason why they don't realize that is that the blood only registers what estrogen is coming from the ovary. So now you have stopped ovulating your ovary at menopause, your ovary just stops doing anything. So it's not measuring the estrogen that is coming from your fat tissue. Okay, so it looks like in the blood you have no estrogen, and then they give you estrogen, and then you begin to gain weight. And then they say, I don't understand why, because your estrogen levels are still low or they're normal. Blood is not a reliable measure of any female or male hormones. Let me just cut to the chase. The blood tells you nothing. And if anyone is following your hormones through the blood, I will debate them at any time and show them the physiology and the textbook that says that they are not getting good information. And so if the doctors aren't getting good information, then the patients aren't going to get good information. And so that's why I say you want to go back to the basics, where it's not my opinion, it's not another doctor's opinion. It is how hormones work. And it's just plain and simple. So,
well, then we hear a lot about cortisol too, because you're talking about, so far you've talked about estrogen and progesterone.
Mm-hmm.
But why is
cortisol's a biggie?
Why is cortisol important?
Okay, so let me tell you how I figured that out. I figured it out the hard way. I thought I was a genius by understanding, estrogen and progesterone. But then about 20-25% of those patients would still say, I'm still having trouble sleeping, or I'm still tired, or I'm still gaining weight. And then we began to understand how important cortisol is. And we actually wrote a book called The Stress Connection, is that stress is connected to every organ in your body. And what happens is that your body is made for sudden stressors, like I'm being attacked by a tiger, or a robber is coming trying to rob me. And so in that acute stress response, you have one or two options. You're either going to escape or you're not. If you escape, then once the threat is over, you say, I dodged that bullet. Or you're going to get caught by the robber and killed, or you're going to get eaten by the tiger. Either way, the cortisol response is short-lived. Okay. Now, our problem is we don't have tigers, and hopefully we're not getting robbed, but we are constantly in a stress state. And that's what I learned in Joe Dispenza. We get addicted to the hormones of stress. So we think being busy or excitement or having 10 things to do, multitasking, we think all of that is productive, but really is putting us in a stress state. And then you add on the stress of a family, the stress of aging parents, the stress of children and financial issues going to college, the stress of eating bad foods or working too late or whatever. All of those stressors build up. And initially cortisol goes up, so you have the energy to do it, because cortisol mobilizes glucose so that you have energy to go through the day. It should be high in the morning and low at night. But when it's constantly high, you get anxious, your brain gets scattered, you get the brain fog. And then when you recover, or when the stress is finally over, you usually don't go back to normal. You end up actually burning out, where you have no energy.
So I have a question for you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So are you saying that, well, I noticed I went through a terrible divorce about 25 years ago, acute stress.
Yeah.
That was also when I started to notice I was gaining weight, and I had never had a weight problem before. Are you saying there's a connection?
Yeah. That's why we call the book The Stress Connection. Yeah, I talk to patients, and there's a study that says 75 to 90%, and this is a study 25 years ago when I first wrote that book. It says that 75 to 90% of all visits to primary care physicians are for stress-related complaints or disorders. So almost everything that a doctor sees a patient complaining of has something to do with stress. And I've actually said that it takes 20 minutes for me to talk to a new patient, for them to tell me what's really going on with them. And I will tell you another thing. I see patients, especially patients with breast cancer, and I will tell you almost to the person that 2 years prior to them developing breast cancer, being diagnosed with breast cancer, that they had some significant stressor, or they had a combination of stressors that happened over the course of 2 to 3 years. And 2 years later, they have some type of cancer. And just because I see a lot of women, it's primarily breast cancer. So yes, stress can cause, I always say stress can kill you. And you were talking about, I went to Joe Dispenza, and that's really what he's talking about, is getting people out of this stress response and getting them to quiet their mind so their body can actually heal.
Wow. Well, so then there's another one that I think people are very confused about, and that's women and testosterone. Do women start needing testosterone?
Let me ask you that. Does that make sense to you?
No,
that
it
all
doesn't.
Of a sudden, that all of a sudden, now that you're 45, 50 years old, now all of a sudden you need testosterone. So here's what's happening. Women are coming in and they're saying their hormones are out of whack. And people who don't understand what they're doing, they draw their blood. And they'll draw their blood and they say, oh my God, you're not making any hormones. You're not making anything. We have to give you everything. Her ovary's not making any hormone. Okay.
Right.
She's making hormones in her adrenal glands. She's making hormones in her fat tissue. So what's happening is the patient comes in and say they're fatigued. The reason why they're fatigued is the cortisol. But because they're not measuring cortisol, they're giving them testosterone for energy. Testosterone is a male hormone. Now, if a man comes in and says they have low libido, they have low testosterone until proven otherwise. No doubt about it. Women, they need their estrogen and progesterone to be in balance to have a libido. They need to feel good to have a libido. You can give a woman testosterone thinking it's going to raise their libido. In some women, it will. But in most women, it's going to cause acne. It's going to cause their hair to thin. It's going to cause them to grow hair where they don't want it. And it will also cause them to be aggressive. Okay. I had a patient who was being seen by another doc, and he kept saying she wasn't absorbing her testosterone. She came to me because her husband was afraid that she was going to hurt him. She was so aggressive. Okay. The other thing is, she was originally a soprano in her church choir. She had to move to alto, and they were about to move her to the tenor section until she finally came to see me. Now, a normal salivary testosterone in a woman should be between like 20.
So really is that 10. What you're saying? I'm going to stop you. Is that how you're measuring it then? Is saliva?
Of course, always,
okay.
Always.
Okay, that's easy. I would way much better do that than a poke in my arm with a needle.
Yeah, especially if it doesn't mean anything.
Okay? Right.
So I drew her saliva level where normal is like between 9 and 40. Hers was 7,000.
Oh my goodness!
And it took almost 2 years for that testosterone level to come down. So yeah, so let's talk about how you measure hormones. You measure hormones in saliva. And this is not something new wave. That's been around since 1960. I was born in 1960, okay? So it's been around that long. Now, the reason why you measure it in saliva, so how much time we got? Okay, but let me tell you. All right, so
20 more minutes, Dr. Taylor.
All right, so this is the best way I can describe this, all right? So hormones are made from cholesterol, so they're fat soluble, all right? Your blood is water soluble. You can see it looks watery. So oil and water don't mix. So if the hormones were transported around unprotected in the blood, they would precipitate out and they wouldn't go anywhere, all right? So there's a protein called sex hormone binding globulin, and I like to say that it's a FedEx truck, okay? So the hormones are going around in a FedEx truck. The blood is measuring the FedEx trucks and the amount of hormone in all of the trucks, okay? Now, what happens is that you don't care how many FedEx trucks are running around in the city. No. You only care about how many packages come to your house. You can bring it into your house and you can use it. Yeah, exactly. Right. All right. So the saliva gland is one of the places where the hormone is delivered and actually used. the hormone has to come out of the blood. The blood is like a highway system. It's a transportation system, getting things from one place to the other. But the work is done inside the cell. And the hormone can be delivered to the cell, and it can stay there for days. I told you that woman who had 7,000, it took 2 years for it to all go away.
Right.
So let's say the FedEx truck is delivering 5 boxes of estrogen a day. Okay. Now you only use 2 a day. All right. But you keep getting 5 a day. The blood is only measuring the FedEx trucks. It's not measuring how much hormone is stored away in your cells, affecting your weight, your breast, your brain, all of that. So you want to measure the number of packages. Now, in the saliva, it's fat tissue around the saliva gland. It's one of the places where fat-soluble hormones get delivered. And the saliva is in equilibrium with those fat cells. So if I know what the normal balance is between estrogen and progesterone in the saliva, and I get it to that point, I should be able to assume that it's at the normal level in the brain and in the breast and in the uterus and all that. And clinically, that has proven to be true. And I've been doing that for 30 years, and it clinically gives me information that I can actually use, and I can monitor it, and I can know that I'm not overdosing my patient. And I can also look at the estrogen that's coming from all sources, coming from your fat tissue, the estrogen that you may be getting exposed through creams, that your facial creams, estrogen that you may be getting exposed through the meat that you eat. So now I get a more comprehensive picture of how much estrogen you're exposed to. And now I can match that with progesterone. Only about 20% of my patients are on estrogen. And those patients are usually thin women who don't have a lot of fat tissue, so they're not creating their own estrogen. But most women, all I have to do is see how much estrogen they're making and give them enough progesterone to balance it out. And most, if not all, of their symptoms go away. The only time it doesn't is that if cortisol is involved, and then there's ways we can normalize cortisol so that your system is running like it's supposed to.
Wow. Okay. Let's move on here, because I think the biggest thing that I want people to know is you can measure this accurately. Okay.
Yeah.
So what are some common symptoms of hormonal imbalance that women often overlook, or maybe maybe they think it's something else? What do you think? What do you think there?
Usually the number one complaint of women over 40, the first thing they will notice is that their sleep gets disrupted. They have trouble falling asleep, or either they wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and they can't go back to sleep. So a lot of times they will have suffered with that for a while and just say, okay, I just can't sleep. But that is due to lack of progesterone. Progesterone can be metabolized into something called allopregnanolone, long name, but it acts like GABA. So it calms the brain down. Okay. So if you start to lose progesterone as you get older, then it's difficult for your brain to calm down. Patients will say, I can't turn my brain off. That's usually the initial sign. Then from that, they become fatigued because they're not sleeping. And then because they're in their 40s, they begin, 2 things happen. Cortisol seems to naturally do this, kind of go down during the day and goes up at night. A lot of times when you have a high nighttime cortisol, that wakes you up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So if you have low progesterone, you have trouble going to sleep. And if you do go to sleep, you can wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because your cortisol is elevated. Wow. And then the third thing is weight gain. So those are the 3 things that patients think is normal, but it's really an early sign that they have a hormone problem.
So when should women, we're going to have, you're going to have your own outlets, but I'm also going to be letting people know where to find you. But I'm betting that you're going to probably say that the first line of defense then is, once you become aware of this information, is to then go get tested. Exactly.
And you're going to have you might have a hard time finding somebody who's going to do saliva testing. There may be some in your area. Again, I spent like 10 years going around the country and even to countries like Australia and continents like Australia, and speaking about this, trying to educate docs. So there are a few docs who are around there. I'm trying to expand my reach because, this needs to be widespread. I can't see everybody. I'm not trying to see everybody. And I just try to educate women about their own physiology, because when they start demanding something, that's when doctors listen. If you start demanding salivary testing, somehow, if they're a decent doc, they're going to try and investigate it. And if they investigate it, they will see the validity of it. So I'm really trying to educate lay people because, hopefully doctors will listen to you. But I think you need to get tested. Now I'm talking about women over 40, but there's all kinds of problems you can have prior to 40. PMS, PCOS, irregular bleeding, all of that we just covered up. I was taught to cover it up with birth control pills. And so if a patient comes in, they were less than 40, you got a birth control pill no matter what your problem was. And I used to call that gynecology made simple, is that if they're less than 40, you give them birth control pills. If that doesn't work, you give them antidepressant. And then if that doesn't work, you cut out the uterus. And it sounds crazy, but ask women, isn't that usually the progression of things that happen to them?
Yeah. Well, are there?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just okay. So we could be like 3 or 4 hours, couldn't we, on this?
Yes.
Where I want to go next is: are there natural or lifestyle changes that you feel that women can? I mean, so let's say they're going to go get tested. They're going to do saliva testing. They're going to start figuring this out by getting some saliva testing done.
Yeah.
What about lifestyle changes? Can women do something to help with hormonal balance with lifestyle changes?
Sure. You have to think that probably 75% of the world, they don't go through all of these changes that women do in industrialized countries. Okay. Why? Because they eat what they grow in their background. They're in their backyard, in the ground in their backyard. So they're eating organic. Okay. They're not getting pesticides, and pesticides can be very potent estrogens. Okay. So you need to eat organic, because most of those pesticides are trying to disrupt the reproductive cycle of the insect. And those same chemicals can disrupt your reproductive cycle. So you want to eat organic. You want to avoid meat if they're not farm raised and no antibiotics. You want to know what they've been fed. Yeah, you want to, because there's estrogen in those meats. They put estrogen in them so that they will grow bigger. So the breast on the chicken will be bigger because estrogen makes tissue grow. All right. So those are things. You can lose weight because, remember, fat tissue makes estrogen. The other thing that women need to do is you need to have bowel movements. Okay. The reason why is that estrogen is excreted through the bowel. If you don't have a bowel movement, that estrogen that should have been delivered out of you can get recirculated. And I can tell you this, I see so many women who think it's normal to have a bowel movement 2 to 3 times a week. You should be having a bowel movement 2 to 3 times a day. Okay. So adding more fiber in your diet can help you to decrease your estrogen levels. And then there's a supplement called chaseberries. We have a product that has it in there. And chaseberries can increase your own natural production of progesterone. So the lifestyle changes you can do is eat organic. If you're going to eat meat, and I'm really an advocate for a plant-based diet, and we can talk about that some other time. But I don't want to be a plant-based organic snob and acting like that's the only thing you can do. But if you could decrease the amount of meat you consume, it would help you. And then more fiber. When you eat fruit, eat the whole peel of the fruit. Probiotics is another one. Probiotics helps you to metabolize estrogen. Your gut, it needs to metabolize it properly and metabolize it into a safe pathway so it doesn't increase your risk of cancer or other hormone-related problems.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about, you were mentioning diet a little bit. What about these popular diets like keto or intermittent fasting? Or do you think they're effective or harmful for hormonal health?
You know what? I've been reading information about intermittent fasting is better for men than for women. Is that women really don't benefit from intermittent fasting like men do. And I found that in a lot of weight loss things. Now, I've done keto. I've done every diet there known to man. And I will tell you what I'm most comfortable with now and what I've been able to maintain the longest is a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
I've gotten to the point where if I see a piece of steak, it doesn't, I don't long for it. I don't miss it. I really enjoy eating a plant-based diet. Do I every once in a while I'll eat some wild caught salmon because I go to the gym regularly and he kind of fusses at me and making sure I eat enough protein. So I will eat salmon. Sometimes if I'm out and there's not a lot of vegetarian choices, I'll eat some type of fish, but I don't eat steak. I don't eat chicken anymore. And it makes me feel good. I don't have any problems with constipation. I don't have to worry about weight gain. My weight stays stable. I feel energetic. You know, a lot of times after you eat meat, you feel sleepy. I can eat and I still have a lot of energy. So that's my personal preference. For me, that's the easiest to stay on. But you know, a lot of these other diets, they're so strict, it's very hard to stay on it long term. This kind of gives me some freedom. And it's just I've probably been plant-based for about 3 years now.
Yeah. I mean, it's more like a lifestyle. Well, okay. So I want to, you know, kind of move into, let's think about how we can empower people that are listening to this.
Yeah.
How can understanding hormones help women reclaim clarity or energy and confidence as they age instead of getting depressed about it? How can understanding hormones empower people?
Well, because hormones affect everything. I mean, they affect your biology, they affect your mental attitude. And I just try and I tell patients 50% of my job is getting you to understand what is going on with you. And once you understand it, then you can almost intuitively figure out what you need to do. And so here's the basics. You have to measure estrogen and progesterone in saliva. That's the only way you can. I won't say it's the only way. That is the best and easiest way for you to measure it. Once you see something is out of balance, and I can show you the report. If the progesterone should be 200 times whatever your estrogen is. So if your estrogen is 1 and your progesterone is 100, then you have to bring that progesterone level up to 200 for it to be back in balance. It's simple math. I can show the patient and they can see it. Okay. I could get one of my patients on here and they could explain saliva testing to you just like that. And that's the key is men think that you're complicated and you are, but your menstrual cycle, I can understand. That's the one thing I can understand about a woman is estrogen and progesterone. So this is how you empower yourself. Either demand that your doctor find out about saliva testing or go to another doctor, or you can come to me at my school group is www.school.com/ageless. And there I have a free course and I try and teach women about their hormones and the importance of it. And that's a free membership. If you want to, delve deeper, then we can go there, but that's free. So that's my whole goal is to empower women so they walk into a doctor's office and they know exactly how their body works. And if that doctor tells them something that doesn't coincide with what they know, then they know that they need to find another doctor. And one reason why I did this is because I would see patients and then I would get them all regulated. Everything was fine. And because they were feeling good, they say, oh, I'll go to my regular doctor now. And somehow they would forget what I told them. The regular doctor would put them on some other regimen. Then they would come to me and say, oh, I went to this other doctor and now I need you to fix me again. And I was like, why did you leave? And so I said, I'm going to have something online so that they can go back and look at this and say, oh, yeah, that doctor said this, but I know this. So I'm going to disregard this because this is what I know. And so that's my empowerment.
You're I mean, you're preaching to the choir here as far as I feel like I've done a whole lot. I've got some weight I would like to lose, but I can't. It just doesn't seem, no matter what I do. And I feel like I live, I'm kind of on this plant-based thing and exercise and everything. But, if someone is feeling defeated because, I'm just going to give up, I'm never going to be able to lose it, or I have brain fog, I think that it's almost like they need to have a paradigm shift, don't you think?
Yeah. And again, you got to stop feeling like a victim. You've got to take your power back. And you need to understand your doctor, and I tell my patients that your doctor is an advisor. He's not king of your body. So I tell patients, if I tell you something and you don't feel good about it, then please don't do it. Either ask me more questions or just don't do it. And I would like for you to do the same thing with any doctor that you go to. If you don't feel good about it, and I've kind of, going through this Joe Dispenza stuff, I have coined myself as the spiritual MD. And I'm like, if your spirit tells you that it's not right, then please don't do it. Don't go against that gut feeling. And women especially have that intuition, and you need to listen to that intuition 24/7. And I don't care how many degrees that guy has on his wall. I don't care how many chairmen of departments he can claim. If it does not coincide with basic physiology, I don't care what credentials he has. He's going against physiology, and truth trumps authority. Okay. I don't care how authoritative. If he says he can't take care of you, if you don't listen to him, then you say, you're right. You cannot take care of me because I'm not going to do it just because you said do it.
Right. Well, do you think there's so let's talk a little bit about some of the myths that might be out there. What about, are there any risks with hormone replacement therapy? If that's one of the things that the doctor is telling her to do?
Yeah. Hormone replacement that is managed and monitored inappropriately is very dangerous. Okay. I have a lecture. I have a little video about how this patient, doctor kept giving her estrogen and saying she wasn't absorbing it. She came to me, her estrogen was like 5 times normal. And I told her, because they were looking at a mammogram or something saying her breast was fine, but she kept feeling something. I was like, with your estrogen that high, you need to demand that you get an MRI. She got an MRI. She had breast cancer. She had to have a double mastectomy. But this guy was pumping her with estrogen. So yes, if you don't monitor it and measure it appropriately, it's very dangerous. Okay. But if you measure it, if you monitor it and measure it appropriately, and you maintain that growth and development balance, then no, I don't believe there's any side effects from it. Whenever I can put you back into balance, you're going to benefit from it in more ways than one. Okay. The key to life, the key to health is balance. And estrogen and progesterone need to be in balance, and they need to be in balance in the tissue, not in the blood. And so, yes. So, water can be very dangerous to you if you have too much of it. Anything can be dangerous if you don't utilize it properly. So yes, I'm a big advocate, and I never give estrogen to a patient unless their saliva says that they're low in estrogen. Yes. And when you do that, you will find out that there's very few people who are low in estrogen. And I can show you the people. If you show me a woman that is 10% below her ideal body weight, she doesn't have enough estrogen. Most of these athletes that you see, these WNBA athletes, they're not having periods because they don't have enough fat tissue for them to have estrogen. And the stress of that sport is turning their ovaries off. So a lot of them are they behave, or they have the hormone levels of a menopausal woman because they have no fat, and the stress of working out and doing all these things, it ends up telling their ovaries to stop because they don't, your body says you're too stressed to have a baby, so we're going to stop you from ovulating. So a lot of these women don't have periods, and some of them can have menopausal symptoms because of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, as you suspected, and as I suspected, this time flew by.
It flies by.
So,
it flies by.
If listeners suspect that they have a hormone imbalance, or if they, like the things that I'm complaining about, like there's some weight I can't get rid of and stuff like that, what's the first step? Where would you tell, we're almost done here, we're going to have to say goodbye. What would you say the first step they should take today is? If
I'm not trying to self-promote, but the first thing is that you go to the ACEs Blueprint school, and she's going to tell you that. But the first thing is to get a saliva test. And I always do that. Before I start, because I use GLP-1s in my office, but I don't even start them on those unless their hormones are balanced. So that is the first step. Get a saliva test. If you can't find somebody to do it, you can order one through my school group. And I'll give you like a video review and tell you, hey, this is what's going on. And you can fix some of those things through supplements. Even progesterone you can get over the counter. Estrogen you can't, but most women aren't even going to need that. So I would tell you the first thing is to figure out what is going on with you. Where are you out of balance? And I can help you, tell you some things that can get you back into balance. So that's the first step, is do the saliva test.
And then maybe think about going plant-based as far as eating.
Going plant-based. Think about, well, you're not going to be able to lose weight unless your hormones straight. So you can't do that.
Right.
You can start eating more fiber, probiotics. If you're not having at least one bowel movement a day, and I would like for you to have 2, you need to get that going. That'll help you get rid of extra estrogen too. So there's things you can do even without the saliva test. I don't want you to think that, you've got to pay a bunch of money to do it. And the saliva test is inexpensive. If you're just doing estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, it's $135. If you add cortisol into it, it's $275. But we try and tell patients, think of how much money you've spent not knowing what's going on with you.
Yeah.
And this one test can explain almost everything. So it really is worth the money. And if you go and look at my Google reviews, you'll see is that that's a minuscule price to pay to actually figure out what's going on with them.
Well, the name of this episode is Weight Gain, Brain Fog, and Bad Advice. I'd say this is just the opposite. I want people to be, way appropriate, be clear, have clarity. Like being a financial advisor, I know that if my brain is not clear, I'm not making the best decisions financially.
Exactly. And that's what women, I'll tell you, women have come to me and said, I may have not have gotten a divorce if I had known my hormones were the problem. I thought it was my husband. And I'm telling you, I've heard that I've heard it more than once. I mean, 5, 6, 7 times. And, I've gotten Christmas cards from husbands and saying, thank you for giving me my wife back. I mean, that was my personal experience. Once I understood this and my wife started taking progesterone, I became a good husband again. So I lived through that. And I tell patients, I tell people when I talk is that I got into this for selfish reasons. I wanted to stay married to my wife, and 2 weeks before her period, she hated me. And then the 2 weeks after that, I was the best husband in the world, and it was driving me crazy, So she got progesterone. All of a sudden, I became a great husband, 30 days out of the month. And so I've lived it. I've lived through every stage. I'm almost 65. So I've lived through the PMS. I've lived through the reproductive cycle, the perimenopause, the menopause. So I'm trying to help other women and trying to help other men who love these women, that how your woman can stay like she's been, for
this
forever.
Is good advice for everybody.
Exactly. it makes men's lives better and the women also. So yeah, I got in this for selfish reasons. I'm not as altruistic as you might think I am.
Well, our time is up.
Okay.
I will have in the bonus downloads place. I will get that there as soon as I can. The Ask Good Questions podcast.com has the bonus downloads, and there you can find the information about Dr. Taylor as soon as I'm able to get that up there. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for exposing me to your clientels or your listeners, and I appreciate the opportunity. And again, I didn't have to get on a plane, and I didn't have to stay in a hotel and eat hotel food. So it's a win for me too also.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all of our listeners out there for joining the Ask Good Questions podcast.
All right. Thank you.
Today's episode is over, but we did ask good questions again, didn't we? Don't miss out as we broadcast live every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY Radio at W4CY.com. Join Bonita Bell Anderson next week for more conversations with experts on finances, retirement, behavioral finance issues, health and wellness, and more. Until then, remember to ask good questions.